Hello there! So we all know learning to map is often confusing. There's a lot that goes into mapping, and understanding all of it takes a long time. Aside from the huge amount of possible content to explore though, there's quite a few reasons why learning about mapping isn't easy. So let's talk about one of them. To start, what exactly is a kickslider? You're an Osu player, meaning you've probably heard the word at some point. Mappers and players I know use it all the time, and I think that might be a problem. As part of updating the ranking criteria, a team of mappers worked on forming this glossary. It lists a bunch of weird Osu-specific terms that appear throughout the ranking criteria, like it's a cheat sheet for anyone unfamiliar with mapping. One word that you'd think would be included here is kickslider, but it's not. In the process of defining kickslider, this team couldn't come to a consensus. Part of the team believed kickslider referred to an ordinary 1/4 slider. The reasoning for that was something along the lines of, this is a slider that players don't actively think about holding, and instead quickly move towards the next object. It's a fast movement, like a kick slider. Makes sense, right? But another fraction of the team believed kickslider referred to a 1/4 slider with reverse arrows. The slider ball kicks back and forth within the slider body, which could also fit the idea of a kick slider. So yeah, nobody shared the same definition of the word. There was a way to check who was right though. While it may be old, the Osu website does have some information that could be useful here. According to this article, we can see kicksliders originally referred to short repeating sliders, not common 1/4 sliders. Well, okay, looks like that was settled then. Just to make sure the official definition was okay for the ranking criteria, a few external people were asked for their opinions on the matter. One of those external people didn't really have a strong opinion either way, which led to him creating a community poll about kicksliders. And there, it was revealed that the widespread definition of it was even more ambiguous than expected. A majority of voters actually believed kicksliders were normal 1/4 sliders, which would traditionally be incorrect. Because of this controversy, the ranking criteria's glossary avoided confusion altogether by opting for short reversing slider instead of kickslider. That problem was solved, but it still doesn't answer the question, what exactly is a kickslider? In the past, it was a short repeating slider, and now a kickslider is nothing. Some people believe it's this, and others believe it's this. And that's part of what makes learning to map hard. As a whole, Osu mapping is full of buzzwords, words that hold little meaning for anyone outside the small minority of mappers. Shorthand for explaining common aspects of mapping as quickly as possible. They're helpful, yes, but only when you already understand them. For different levels of mappers, feedback on maps often uses terminology that isn't always practical to comprehend. In a few ways, buzzwords can hold people back from easily learning how to map. The first way is what you'd expect. Not everyone knows these common mapping words. For example, my last video talked about the relationship between slider velocity and a few types of sliders. 1/4 sliders, 1/2 sliders, and 3/4 sliders. Even without seeing the video, a mapper could easily interpret what I was talking about, but could a player? Could any new mapper? Probably not. I mean, to a player, what is a 1/2 slider? Is that half a slider? Cutting the slider's length in half? What is half a... It's not very clear. To a mapper though, it's obvious. A 1/2 slider is a slider whose length is half a beat. I see mods on new mappers maps saying stuff like, a 1/2 slider more appropriately represents a song here. To the modder, saying 1/2 slider is as common as saying hello. It's painfully obvious since it's used so often. Does it make sense to the new mapper though? Not at all. There's tons of terms like this, stuff that's both more simple and more complex than what this glossary could ever list. And a good portion of these terms are meaningless to new mappers. This is all stuff that they'll learn eventually though, there's no getting around that. But the second way buzzwords hold new mappers back from learning is through their multiple definitions. This is exactly what I talked about with kicksliders. Some people believe one definition is correct, and some people believe another one is correct. Semantic change is unavoidable, but without distinction, it's impossible to know what someone is really referring to. Like, for example, a mod could say, replacing the stream with kicksliders would improve the spread. But what does that mean? Assuming a new mapper somehow does recognize the word kickslider, would they know whether to replace the stream with this or this? The modder has to specify what they mean exactly, at which point the word is kind of unnecessary. A better example of this multiple definitions concern might be the word timing. To me, this is timing. Red lines, BPM, time signature, offset, all that nonsense I talked about for 15 minutes. This is all I've ever known timing as, and this is what all mappers know timing as well. To a lot of players though, all this stuff is irrelevant. Timing does not mean this. Timing instead is the word for a map's rhythm. The times that a player clicks are what makes up a map's timing. I get it, but it's weird. It's really weird. Every situation where I see a player say something like, "The timing is weird on this map," I have to question what they really mean due to the word's ambiguous definitions between mappers and players. The third way buzzwords can cause confusion, however, is probably the worst. Defining words that shouldn't be defined. Sounds kinda similar to what I just talked about, but it's not the same. I'm not talking about assigning a random word to a slider. I'm talking more about using a specific word that's unintentionally misleading. The most common example of this would have to be feedback talking about stuff like good flow. Theoretically, any type of movement can be good if executed effectively, but the words good flow are often associated with smooth circular flow. If a modder says something like use good flow here, they probably mean something like use circular flow here, and that in itself is a problem. It gives new mappers the idea that this is the type of flow they should be using. It's good, and to create a good map, it needs good flow. Circular flow is good, but it's not the only type of good. For example, this map avoids circular flow as much as possible. Yet, I still think the movement on it is pretty solid. It uses a back and forth concept for groups of objects and separates those groups according to the song's phrasing. By learning that good flow is the same as circular flow and associating that with the way to make a good map, a mapper could never get a result like this. And that's not even mentioning the common technique of breaking any sort of flow for the sake of emphasizing sounds in a song. Good flow is the most common example of this, but the idea carries over to all the most universally accepted ways of handling any other elements of mapping. Good visuals are hexagonal grids and slightly angled sliders. Good spacing emphasizes percussion. All of these are really easy to replicate acceptable ways of mapping, and that's why they're recommended through feedback so often. At the same time though, due to their simplicity, they can limit new mappers from trying new, possibly more interesting mapping concepts. When buzzwords imply something that isn't necessarily true, and those buzzwords spread to mappers as they steadily learn all the necessary vocabulary for reading and interpreting mods, they may end up misled when it comes to understanding what makes a good map. Buzzwords are never going to go away, I know that, but it's still necessary to think about the context in which you're using them. Everyone needs to be on the same level for feedback to be easily interpreted. Before ranting about rhythms on a new mapper's map, explain what these obscure fractions mean. Before using words that have multiple definitions, explain which definition you're referring to. And before using words that could imply something misleading, explain... well, how about you just don't use those? Thanks to these guys for supporting this video, and I'll see you next week.